Alright, so for our very first true haunted story tonight, we're starting small, but we're starting deep. We're heading to the rural Midwest, to a place that doesn't look like much, but that many people claim is the most evil place in North America. David and I were obsessed with urban legends and haunted places. We were the kind of guys who thought we knew everything, you know? We'd been to a few spooky graveyards, seen some shadows in abandoned factories, but we were mostly skeptics looking for a thrill. That attitude is exactly what makes this story so chilling. I'd read everything I could find about Willow's Weep. From the outside, the house looks like a standard, slightly shabby 19th century Victorian farmhouse. It's got that faded white paint peeling away, and it's starting to sag in a few places. It looks tired, but the reason it's famous or infamous is twofold. First, there's the willow tree that hangs low over the yard, its branches touching the roof like long wet hair. People say the name comes from the way the tree seems to perpetually mourn, the leaves hanging down like heavy tears. Second, and this is the detail that truly sticks with you, the house is built with a floor plan that forms an upside-down cross. Architects claim it was just a strange design choice, but local legends say it was deliberate. It was built that way, either to attract something malevolent or, perhaps more terrifyingly, to trap it inside. The history of the place is just relentless misery. Back in the 1890s, the original owner died sitting in his bathtub. That started the string of bad luck. There were house fires, a poisoning incident involving 3 men, and the place has seen at least 3 confirmed suicides over the years. One man allegedly hanged himself right in the living room months before a new family was set to move in. It's a place that just collects pain. David and I decided to drive out there one chilly November evening. We weren't planning to trespass or go inside, just to see it, feel the atmosphere, and maybe debunk a few myths. The drive was uneventful until we turned onto the gravel road leading up to the house. The deeper we drove, the quieter the world got. It was a deep, smothering kind of silence. Not the peace of the country, but the quiet of a place holding its breath. No crickets, no wind rustling the skeletal trees, nothing. We parked about 100 yards away and just watched. The house looked bigger in the fading light. It was maybe 6:30 p.m., but the sky had already gone that bruised, deep purple color. The windows were dark, like empty eyes staring out from under a heavy brow. I felt that tightness in my chest almost immediately. You know the feeling? When you realize you're doing something you absolutely should not be doing. It wasn't the thrill we were looking for. It was pure, unadulterated unease. David, trying to keep up the bravado, finally whispered, "Well, it's creepy." Mission accomplished. But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't just observing the house. The house was observing us. We decided to walk closer, sticking to the edge of the property line. The ground was spongy with wet leaves. Every time our boots crunched on the gravel, it sounded deafeningly loud in the oppressive silence. As we got nearer, the famous willow tree came into focus. Its heavy branches, stripped bare in the cold, did look like they were drooping with sorrow. We made it to the edge of the yard, maybe 20 feet from the front porch. I noticed a rocking chair sat in the corner, still as stone. The chair wasn't old and broken, it looked antique but well preserved. And as we stood there, I noticed something even stranger than the silence. The windows, those dark, reflective squares, didn't just show our reflections. They seemed to show something else inside the house, just for a second. I squinted, trying to rationalize the trick of the light. But I saw it again, a brief flicker of movement, something tall and slender, standing back in the deepest shadow of the living room, just beyond the glass. It wasn't clear enough to be a person. It was just an absence of light in the shape of a vertical figure. David didn't see it. He was busy looking at the basement windows, nervously cracking jokes. I didn't mention it to him. I was too busy watching the window, waiting for the figure to move again. It didn't, but then I heard the sound. It was faint, so faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. It sounded like a muffled sigh. Then, a soft, rhythmic clicking sound coming from inside the house. Click, click, click. It sounded like fingernails tapping on hardwood, or maybe a tiny object falling over and over. We both stopped. David finally stopped joking and turned his head, his eyes wide in the dark. "What was that?" David whispered. I held up a hand. "I don't know." The clicking continued for maybe 10 seconds, coming from the center of the house, and then the rhythmic noise stopped, replaced by something much worse. It was the crying, not a loud, wailing sob. That would have been easier to dismiss as a neighbor or an animal. This was quiet, soft, muffled, like someone was weeping into a heavy pillow on the second floor. It was broken by tiny, hitching gasps. It sounded undeniably human, and it sounded deeply, thoroughly hopeless. David bolted. He didn't say a word. He just turned and ran, scrambling back toward the car, tripping over the wet leaves. I stood frozen for another few seconds, my feet stuck to the earth. I felt the cold deepen, becoming a sharp, localized point right behind my shoulder, like someone had put a piece of dry ice there. I knew with absolute certainty that whatever was weeping was now right behind the front door. I didn't need to see it. I didn't need to hear the clicking or the chains. That sudden, piercing cold and the sound of that heartbroken crying were all I needed. I finally turned and ran, sprinting faster than I thought possible. I threw myself into the passenger seat as David frantically fumbled with the key in the ignition. We tore out of there, throwing gravel as we went, not looking back until we were miles away on the brightly lit highway. I never became a skeptic again after that night. I realized that places like Willow's Weep don't just have ghosts. They have a history of anguish that lives on. The house collects all that sorrow and pain, presses it into the walls, and forces anyone who gets too close to listen to it weep. That crying didn't stop when we drove away. I heard that sound in my head for weeks, a quiet, muffled sorrow that was impossible to shake. Because Willow's Weep isn't just a house. It's a wound, and it still aches. Alright, so we've covered the quiet, insidious evil of the Farmhouse. Now we're going big. We're talking institutional, historical horror on a grand scale. We are heading to West Virginia, to the Trans-Allegheny Lunatic Asylum. This is the largest hand-cut stone masonry building in North America. Just let that sink in. It's a monolith of 19th century architecture, and it is absolutely steeped in human misery. My name is Chris, and this is the story of my 6 months working night security at that place. For those 6 months, I experienced more than a lifetime's worth of dread. When I first started, I was mostly excited. I was a skeptic, you know? I wanted to see a ghost. I'd read the history, sure. The place opened in 1864. It was designed for maybe 250 patients, but by the 1950s, they had squeezed in over 2,400 people. Think about that. Overcrowding, disease, neglect, experimental lobotomies. It was a place designed for healing that became a machine for suffering. The air in there is thick with it. My job was simple. Patrol the perimeter, check the main doors, and make sure no one was getting in and no one was getting out. The building is so huge, my patrol route inside was almost 1.5 miles just to cover the main wings. I was alone from 10 p.m. until 6 a.m. 8 hours of darkness inside 242,000 square feet of stone and sorrow. The first few shifts, they were fine. Just spooky. The place is naturally creepy when it's empty. The ceilings are too high. The halls are too long. Every sound echoes. You're constantly hearing the natural sounds of the building settling, the creaks, the groans, the metallic ping of old pipes cooling down. You rationalize everything. You have to. If you don't, you quit on night one, but then the unnatural sounds start. It began on the 4th floor of the north wing. That wing, I learned, was where they kept the most violent and aggressive patients. I was up there around 1 a.m., just standing by the fire escape, looking out over the town lights. It was quiet. Too quiet. Then I heard it. Footsteps. They weren't heavy boots like mine. They were quick, light, almost shuffling steps. And they were running down the hall above me. But I knew, absolutely knew, that the floor above me was the attic. And there was no access up there without a key I didn't have. I grabbed my flashlight, shone it straight up at the ceiling, and listened. The footsteps stopped. just stopped. I stood there for a good minute, waiting for the natural settling noise to resume, waiting for the wind. Nothing. I started walking, telling myself it was a raccoon, or maybe just the air currents shifting in the massive structure. Then, as I walked, the footsteps resumed. They were pacing me. Every time my boots took a step, the shuffling above took one, too. I stopped. They stopped. I started to walk faster. They started to run, I won't lie. I ran right out of that wing and didn't slow down until I hit the main lobby. I wrote it down in my log as unexplained structural noises. As the weeks went on, the place wore me down. I started carrying my massive flashlight in one hand and my radio in the other, just so I felt like I had something to fend things off with. The absolute worst place to be was the women's ward. It felt like the air temperature dropped 20 degrees the moment you stepped onto that floor. I started hearing whispers there. Not clear words, but the faint, overlapping sound of dozens of people talking at once. It was a constant, low, indistinct chatter like a crowded waiting room, but completely muted. One night, I was checking the patient records room. It was just a small, dark closet they use for storage now. I opened the door, flashed my light around, and was about to close it when I felt this sudden, incredible rage. It wasn't my rage. It wasn't frustration. It was this boiling, explosive, irrational anger that slammed into my chest. It was so potent, I actually stumbled back, gasping. I felt like I wanted to smash something, to scream, to lash out. It was a wave of pure, concentrated fury that did not belong to me. I realized I was standing in a place where people were locked away, alone, afraid, and forgotten. That rage I felt? That was an emotional echo of the patients who died there, trapped in their own minds and trapped in those walls. I sprinted down the hall, my heart hammering like a drum. I got outside to my patrol car and sat there for 10 minutes, just breathing deeply, trying to wash that dark feeling out of my chest. It felt like I'd been infected. The final straw happened in the children's ward. Yes, they had a children's ward. The history books say the children were often the most neglected and abused patients there. It was almost 4 a.m. I was standing near the old dusty chalkboard when I heard a distinct sound from one of the adjacent patient cells. Not a creak, not a whisper. It was the sound of a rubber ball bouncing, thump, thump, rhythmic, playful. I froze. I knew every piece of debris in that wing. There were no rubber balls. I raised my flashlight and slowly walked toward the sound. The bouncing stopped right outside the heavy steel door of a specific cell. I stood at the door, shining my light through the tiny observation window. The cell was empty. Dusty, cobweb-filled, but completely empty. I backed up slowly, turning my headlamp off, and that's when I felt it, a gentle, almost curious tug on the back of my pant leg. It felt like a small, cold hand just pulling on the fabric. I didn't scream. I didn't shout. I just ran. I ran down those long, echoing halls, past the old morgue, past the administrative offices, and I ran right out the main door, straight into the cool night air. I drove home that morning and called my supervisor before my shift even ended. I told him I was done. I couldn't go back. The Trans-Allegheny Asylum isn't just haunted. It's an endless echo chamber of sorrow and pain. It doesn't want you to run away. It wants you to feel exactly what the patients felt. Isolated, trapped, and slowly going mad. I went there wanting a thrill. I left knowing that some suffering is so immense it gets permanently cemented into the walls. And when you walk through those halls, you are walking through the deepest, darkest nightmares of thousands of lost souls. For our final true haunted story tonight, we're heading to a place that combines the worst of both worlds. It's a place where extreme human malice permanently stained the stone and mortar. This is the story a freelance architectural contractor named Daniel sent to me. For the next few minutes, I'm going to tell it entirely through his eyes. This is what happened to him while working in the French Quarter of New Orleans. I was a contractor who worked on historic buildings, dealing with ancient plaster and leaky pipes. And as you know, New Orleans is a city built on dark secrets. Every street corner has a ghost. But there is one particular spot in that whole city, and maybe in the whole country, that just radiates pure, unadulterated evil. I'm talking about the LaLaurie Mansion on Royal Street. Even among the locals, this place isn't just haunted, it's wrong. The historical facts of this place, the things I later looked up in the library, are far more horrifying than any fiction. The mansion's owner in the 1830s was Madame Delphine LaLaurie, a stunning, well-respected socialite. She threw the best parties. She was known for her wealth. But behind those grand, shuttered windows, she was committing unspeakable acts. In 1834, there was a fire. It started in the kitchen. When the authorities rushed in to investigate, they didn't just find a burned room. They found a locked room in the attic that no one was allowed to touch. When they broke the door down, they found a secret torture chamber. The historical records, and they are graphic, showed victims, enslaved people, who had been subjected to horrific, grotesque, and medically bizarre experiments. It wasn't simple punishment. It was calculated, sadistic torment. When the public found out, a mob stormed the house, but Madame LaLaurie escaped, vanishing forever. She left behind a trail of unimaginable suffering. The house has stood there ever since, constantly sold and resold, but never truly lived in. It's an empty monument to cruelty. My company was hired to do some emergency work on the exterior stucco walls and the drainage system in the basement. This meant I had a full week of access to the house's exterior and, occasionally, the courtyard and basement, all after hours. My first impression, the mansion looks magnificent. It's the definition of French colonial opulence. But it's also utterly, unnervingly silent. I was in the heart of the French Quarter, a place known for constant noise, but when I stepped into that courtyard, the sound just died. It was like stepping into a vacuum. I hated going down into the basement. I just felt cold down there. Not temperature cold, but a chilling sense of dread. The air was heavy, thick, and it carried a persistent, faint metallic smell. It made me instantly uneasy. I had to be down there for hours checking the pipes, and every muscle in my back was tense the entire time. My initial encounters were small, typical things. Tools disappearing and reappearing 20 feet away. A faint, low humming sound coming from the ceiling of the basement, a sound that wasn't mechanical and had no source. I could rationalize that stuff. Old building settling maybe, but then things got weird. One Tuesday night, I was working alone in the courtyard, replacing a section of broken pipe near the back entrance. It was around 2 a.m. I was kneeling, concentrating on my work, when I heard it. It was faint, but unmistakable. The sound of a woman screaming. Not a loud, full-throated scream, but a muffled, hysterical wail. It sounded like it was coming from inside the mansion's second floor. I immediately jumped up and looked at the windows, all dark, all shuttered tight. I tried to tell myself, it's New Orleans, someone's drunk. It's coming from the street. But the sound was inside the courtyard. It was close. Then I heard something else, something much more sickening. The scream cut off abruptly, replaced by the distinct, heavy sound of metal dragging across a rough floor. Scrape, clink, drag. It was the noise of chains, and they weren't being pulled. They were being walked. Slowly. That's when my rational brain completely shut down. That combination of the sudden silence after the scream and the rhythmic sound of heavy chains linked directly to the history of the house, I knew, deep in my gut, what I was hearing was a replay of the mansion's suffering. I didn't run. I couldn't. I just backed up slowly, my eyes glued to the dark windows, waiting for a shadow, a figure, anything. The chain sound got closer, moving toward the courtyard door. I backed myself right up against the stucco wall. I felt frozen, paralyzed by the dread. And then I felt a sudden, sharp, ice-cold pressure against my shoulder. It felt exactly like a hand pressing down on me. It wasn't a chill. It was heavy, and it was cold enough to make me gasp. That was my breaking point. I didn't even pack my tools. I sprinted out of the courtyard, through the front gate, and ran down Royal Street until I hit the first brightly lit bar. I called my foreman and told him I was done. I couldn't go back. Not for any money. I realized the LaLaurie Mansion is different. It's not passively haunted by sad spirits. It is actively held hostage by malevolent entities, the very same ones that Madame LaLaurie conjured through her acts of pure evil. The mansion isn't just a place where ghosts live. It's a living monument to human depravity, demanding that you remember the suffering that happened inside. And that, my friends, is why the LaLaurie Mansion remains one of the most terrifying, cursed, true haunted spots in all of America. That wraps up our 3 true haunted stories from America's most terrifying cities. Did any of these locations keep you up tonight? Let me know in the comments below.